I'm Tim Giuliani. You're listening to the Orlando Real podcast.
Today I hung out with Tim Giuliani. He's the president and CEO of the Orlando Economic Partnership. His job is to bring jobs and economic development to Orlando. If you've watched our channel or listened to our podcast before, you know that I'm a big fan of what Orlando could be. And so in today's episode, we talked about the jobs that are coming here beyond the theme parks and what we can be known for as Orlando. Stay tuned. What is the Orlando Economic Partnership?
So it's an independent nonprofit organization. We work across boundaries. We're basically trying to advance broad-based prosperity in Central Florida. So how do you grow the economy? How to create more opportunities? We work with local governments and we work with private businesses to make that happen.
But nonprofit. So but the goal is to grow profit. Yeah. So it's I think you read it online and it can be confusing. And yet I see you guys everywhere. Like every event I go to, whether it's Disney or it's something with the city, like you're a part of that. And so how does that actually work? Like explain people what you guys do on a day in and day out basis.
Yeah, we probably do more than most people think because they know us for one thing. But, at the center of our economic development strategy, it's about growing our tech economy. It's about recruiting companies to expand here, maybe to relocate to Orlando. And when I say Orlando, I mean all of Central Florida. Yeah,
that's such a contentious conversation. Comment people I live in Orlando, and they're like, you live in Winter Garden. I'm like, well, it's Greater Orlando. Come on, get it with it. But you're talking about kind of the 5-county area, or where do you guys service actually?
Yeah, really, we focus on 3.
Okay.
Osceola, Orange, and Seminole.
Okay.
And so we work with those local government leaders every day to help these companies choose Orlando. We do a lot in the area of leadership development, trying to get more people involved in sort of civic life and as business leaders really influencing what happens in the economy and in the community.
Yeah.
And then we also do a lot of advocacy work. So that might be on housing, it might be on transportation, it might be on trying to attract the semiconductor funding that we've recently been successful at.
Yeah.
So it's really about driving investment into Central Florida.
I love that. And so most people know Orlando. Before I moved here, Orlando was theme parks, right? And then when you get here, you realize there's a lot more than that. So would you say your job is basically to be the evangelist of Orlando and basically go out to these other places and say like, hey, there's a lot more reasons to be here?
Yeah, I think we're not only trying to write the story, but we're trying to tell the story.
Yeah.
And it's really, there's such big brands that are very, very well known internationally, and that puts Orlando on the map.
Yep.
It's our job to help expand that definition of Orlando and help them see us. The same time Disney was being built, we were in the space race, which was building our tech economy here.
Yeah.
And so helping to fill in the gaps and tell that whole story.
That's awesome. So you talked about semiconductors. That's one of the major emerging places here. What other things would people not know about Orlando in terms of industry?
Yeah, I think, before Disney even, we had Martin Marietta. So we have Lockheed Martin now. Over 10,000 people are employed here in Central Florida by Lockheed Martin. Most of them, if not all of them, in technology fields. Yeah. So we have a huge, we now have more people working in tech than working at Walt Disney World in Central Florida.
That's crazy. That's a huge stat right there. Actually, make sure you got to clip that. That's so good. That's what other industries do you feel like? So tech is a big one. Like Lockheed Martin is also national defense, right? Or defense contractors.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of following that defense theme, we have the largest modeling, simulation, and training cluster in the world. So what that means in the world. So all of the military branches have procurement offices here, and just military business alone, there's over $6 billion a year awarded in contracts. So it's a lot of stuff people can't talk about,
sure.
Which is why they don't know about it.
Right.
But even down to what's on the Mars rover, there's lots of components that are made here, designed here in Central Florida. JetBlue trains all their pilots here in Central Florida because of the flight simulators.
Yeah, we did Semiconductor Aviation. They did a tour for us. That's incredible. I had no idea that stuff existed.
Yeah, that was one of our projects. So it's often the non-sexy stuff, the what actually drives business investment is what we're focused on.
Sure. And so, Silicon Valley, people just are like, oh, they're tech. That's all people know. And that's enough for a lot of people because it feels like, oh, that's where that's driving. What would drive more business to want to come to Orlando then?
I think, for us, it's telling the story and it's getting more looks and it's getting more people to put their eyes on Orlando because they think they already know it.
Yeah.
And so the first thing we do when we get here is, welcome to the Orlando you only thought you knew.
Yeah.
Because it's so much more than they have in their head. Because they've all visited Orlando at some point.
Yeah.
But has any of them ever gone downtown? Do any of them even know we have a skyline?
Yeah.
Any of them know, the connectivity we have to the Space Coast? So there's so much here that people, generally speaking, don't have their arms around it. So it's really about getting that story out. One of the facts that we put out, just to get people thinking differently, is there's over 500,000 college students within a 2-mile drive of downtown Orlando.
Is that true?
That's absolutely true. Yeah. So you look at the opportunity that presents growing businesses that are probably somewhere where the population is not growing. And so the ability to recruit, to have a talent pipeline, to work with our universities, that just gets people thinking a little bit differently about what Central Florida has to offer.
This episode of the Orlando Real Podcast is brought to you by the Posit Group, my real estate team here in Orlando. We've had over 1,400 five-star reviews over on Google. So whether you're looking to sell or buy a house anywhere in Central Florida, we want to be your real estate resource of choice. Make sure you reach out at theorlandoreal.com/real. I'd heard that one time that UCF had I think we're the largest public university in the country, first or second.
Right.
And that the good majority of kids come here but they stay. Like they're not always from Orlando.
Right.
They come because the college is what it is, and they decide not to leave. Now we have to create more jobs to keep them here, right? Or they're going to start leaving out to other places, and I think that's what you guys are spending a lot of time doing. What would keep a business from moving to Orlando then?
Well, number one, they probably don't know about the opportunity.
Okay.
Number two, we're not as sort of cheap as we used to be.
Sure.
And I think that's a common misperception at this point is, Florida in general is so much cheaper.
Yeah.
Another thing, people believe Florida's old.
Yeah.
The average age in Orlando is 34. So it's actually the youngest city in Florida.
Wow.
And, it's more changing mindsets,
Sure.
I think. There was a reason that Disney picked Orlando, and it was the crossroads of Florida.
Yeah.
And so that geography that drove decisions that really began the hockey stick growth that Orlando's experienced is still so true, whether we're talking about logistics and transportation, sort of the domestic onshoring, the everyone buying what they need from home and having it shipped. That's a big logistical challenge, and being at the crossroads of the state. So I think, the limits are things like transportation, housing supply, and costs.
Yeah.
So those are the things I think that we have to kind of look at going forward to make sure that we remain competitive, we remain vibrant and growing and dynamic, and we don't become a victim of our own success.
Man, that's good to say. And do you think the victim of your own success is complacency? Just like, hey, we're doing okay?
Yeah, I think to a large degree that is. I think we've benefited from decades of foresight and good decision-making. And, they've been working on the Terminal C of the airport for 20 or 30 years, depending on who you talk to. But that's the type of long-term thinking that we need.
Yeah.
We need that on transportation. We were set up to get high-speed rail. We would already have it to Tampa, but the federal money was declined.
Oof.
So now Charlotte enjoys light rail. So I think there's some long-term projects we really need to focus on.
It's interesting, the long-term projects and I went to the investor update for OEP, and they were talking about somebody from the airport was talking about how it takes on average 10 years to get an airline to even make the moves that you need to. So how far out are you guys planning at this point to kind of what Orlando looks like in the future?
Yeah, certainly opening up those markets is big. Yeah. And, the airport recently announced another direct flight occurrence to Paris. And so that's another, obviously, international hub for transportation. There's, Mayor Dyer and the airport, Mayor Demings have been going to Asia, trying to look at Japan as an opportunity. We've been either participants or led different delegations to Germany and to Spain and to London, to Taiwan, Seoul, Tokyo. So there's, I think, an internationalization of Central Florida. That's where all of our growth is coming from, is largely from immigrants.
Yeah.
There's people moving here from all over the country. 1 in 5 people that live here today were born in a different country. So it's that internationalization of Orlando that I think is the real opportunity.
And it's not even just the huge industries moving here. One of the cool things I heard from you guys you put out recently was there's a lot of small businesses that come here with maybe 5, 10, 20 jobs, and then it grows into something much, much bigger. You hear what are some success stories that maybe people would know or haven't heard of yet?
Well, I'll give you one that I personally think is really interesting. Probably a lot of listeners will too. So a company called Red 6, they're out of Santa Monica, California.
Okay.
And what they have figured out, so they basically got a developer along with a former fighter pilot. Actually, the first English-born now American soldier flying F-22 Raptor. So they start this company, they build this plane, And essentially what they've done is the old, well, still current, but soon to be old way of thinking was to train fighter pilots. We had to put our old planes up in the sky and they had to simulate fighting other old planes that don't really represent the current potential enemy.
Right.
So they've put AR in the visor of their flight helmets. And so now they can reduce the plane and simulate the plane. So now it's a smaller, cheaper, easier to acquire plane.
Yeah.
They put them up in the sky, and now because of the AR, I mean, they could be fighting like Star Wars scenarios, or they could be going against potential enemies in the sky, giving our intelligence. We already know what those aircraft look like, how they behave. And so this creates a much more modern approach to Air Force training and pilot training.
And so, they're located here now?
So, yeah. So they were looking at Miami and Orlando and realized kind of in their growth pattern that what ended up happening was they were able to find the talent they need and they were able to recruit to Orlando a whole lot easier than they could Miami. So they now, if you see these small planes buzzing in the sky that kind of look like fighter planes, but they're not quite.
You're like, wait a minute, are we under attack? What's going on?
Yeah, so they're flying all over Orlando now, but that's Red 6. That's a really cool project. Started as a couple people. Now about 150.
That's so cool. I love that. So it's interesting you mentioned Miami because I think in going back to the idea of why Disney chose Orlando, one of my mentors owns a lot of land here, was talking about the hub and spoke model and like of Florida, right? So Orlando's right in the center, like everything's coming here and you kind of go out from there. And then Miami's just super expensive, right? And so I think that it's an easier draw to come to Orlando. But going back to like the whole...
Well, let me tell you something that you might not know because it surprised us as we were tracking our web analytics of... we're always interested where people are located that are checking us out.
Yeah.
Who's looking at Orlando. We all know it's been New York, right? It's been New York. To some degree, it's been Chicago. After COVID, more from California. Before COVID, they couldn't really see themselves moving all the way across the country. Right. Now there's a little bit more likely to do that. But what we've picked up on in the last 2 years, there's a lot of looks from South Florida and a lot of looks from the Atlanta area.
Interesting.
Which is really interesting, and it just speaks to, how those cities have grown and urbanized and gotten to a certain maybe saturation point, and now
pushing people out.
Now it's interesting they seem to be looking at Orlando.
That's wild. We actually see that a lot in our Instagram analytics, like where are people watching from? New York all of a sudden shot up. Chicago's always been there, but we're seeing a lot of Miami as well. And we're even getting that on our real estate side is like there's a lot of people that are like, we're just sick of the hustle and bustle. It's a little too overcrowded. It's a little too expensive. Everything we go, whether it's out to eat or whatever, just a little too much. Orlando is like built up enough, but not so built up that they feel like they can't put down roots here. Yeah.
I think the other wild card that I just always think about is given, all the changes in the environment, for instance, all the hurricanes that we've been having in Florida, sort of those people that decide to maybe live elsewhere. Right. Maybe, Florida's had issues with its housing insurance.
Yep.
Worse along the coast for sure.
Yeah.
Orlando's protected enough in the middle of the state that most storms we do just quite fine.
Yeah.
And so it seems like there's also people from the coast that are looking into the middle of the state.
So cool. So going back to the transportation item that you mentioned earlier, so we denied the funds is what it is. And yet that's one of the main things people talk about. Like, the joke that people say in the comment section is just like, one more lane, bro, that's all you need. But like, we obviously need a lot more than just one more lane. What are some things that we should be hoping for, or we should maybe push for as residents?
Yeah, I mean, clearly there's lots of opportunity to improve in transportation. And it's not easy. It would have been solved by now, and it takes a lot of money. And thankfully, like for instance, in Seminole County, they've been able to keep a half-cent sales tax recurring, and their voters have approved that now for the 4th time. And so they've been able to help keep up, the great quality of life. They've done a nice job of creating sort of urban environments and natural environments. So we need to spread that out in Orange, Osceola counties and really think regionally about transportation.
Yeah.
But there's some key projects, I think. The Sunshine Corridor comes to mind.
You guys are behind that, yeah?
Yeah, we're definitely
helping with it.
Definitely want to see more transportation options. I mean, yes, we got to keep building. That's how the city's been built. There's no real changing that.
Right.
But how do you add options? If we could get the cars off the road that are going to Convention Center, Universal, and Disney, that would solve a lot of challenges that currently exist.
So I know over in the Universal area and the iDrive area, they were adding some like trolley systems that are potentially coming. Like it's almost like thinking a little bit outside of the box that way, right? Yeah, if you can take a couple hundred cars here and there every hour, like it feels not as congested.
Yeah, I mean we're not a city where you could just build an underground train system.
No, yeah,
right. So we're going to have to think creatively, and we've developed rather so fast that now you got to really look at creative options, and there certainly are with technology, autonomous vehicles. There's lots of options. There's SunTrax down in Polk County.
What's that?
So SunTrax is affiliated with Florida Polytech.
Okay.
And it's kind of like smart roads, smart transportation testing bed. So that's a lot of ideas. You know, the Expressway Authority. You know, most people may not think innovative.
Yeah.
They're really innovative. We got our first like self-charging lane.
Yeah, 516
coming on board.
Yeah.
Yep. But just the technology that they deploy, you know, without them, you know, we wouldn't have been able to keep up with the growth and build as much as we have. So that took a creative funding. Most people don't like paying tolls on a regular basis, but without them, we would have been in way worse traffic.
Way worse traffic, that's for sure. So you and I have talked about this on some of our past shows. You and I, along with a bunch of other cool people from Orlando, went to Nashville on a trip there. And part of the things that we talked about there was that they had this regional outlook. And you just mentioned it, sort of like, so for us, the regional will be like Orange County, Osceola, and Seminole County, all getting together. So Seminole has the half-penny tax. It was denied here in Orlando, right? But I think we're supposed to be maybe coming back around to that.
It'll have to.
Yeah.
It'll have to come back around.
And I think people, it's like, listen, it's one other thing that if you really want the roads to get better, then put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. Is that really our only other outlook?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality of the situation is there's no other good way to pay for it.
Yeah.
There's nothing else that's going to bring that much revenue. There's nothing else that's going to rely on tourists to pay the majority of that revenue because they're visiting here. So it's probably the fairest way to raise the funds that are needed for transportation options.
Right on. So going back to the semiconductor and other jobs kind of stuff. So NeoCity is something you guys were helped to bring to the area. So for those people that don't know what NeoCity is, can you unpack that for them?
Yeah. So this is our strategy around semiconductors, and it's been in existence for 10 years now, which is why we're having overnight success, right? You know, kind of finally aligned. You know, this is a very bipartisan type of issue. It's reshoring. It's about national security. It's about, you know, taking back market share when it comes to semiconductors. And so, you know, Osceola County has been really at the forefront. They've been bold. They've stuck with it. Instead of building another spring training complex, although I love baseball, they went with the route of how do you transform the economy and how do you add a new cluster of activity.
Yeah.
So there has been semiconductor activity in Central Florida for a long time. A lot of that has gone away, which is a common story across the U.S. So now that there's sort of political alignment and funding to bring some of that back, you know, we've been able to benefit from that. So over the last 18 months, NeoCity has brought in over $500 million in investment to help stimulate the semiconductor cluster. You know, so we're being built out. We're expanding the fab. There's Class A office building. There's now NeoCity Academy across the street, and new programs at Valencia College to support. There's new programs coming online at UCF. So it really takes a whole ecosystem. I think we're doing it right and building a workforce pipeline. Because one of the coolest stories is one of the first employees at Skywater, which is a company out of Minnesota that we helped bring to Osceola County. One of their first people to go through the training programs and get hired was a former chef.
Nice.
That switched careers and got into a clean room at a semiconductor company. So I think there's lots of opportunity for a lot of people, but it's not an overnight type of thing.
But even if you think about going back to the UCF idea of like people that come here, go to college here, we want to keep them here. Those are the jobs that now they can make good money, they can stay, they can grow a family, they can buy a house, they can do all these kind of things where you can't do it maybe at a tourism kind of job, which those are great. We need those. We need the hospitality world, but like having that chef to clean room guy opportunity is needed.
Yeah, we definitely need them both.
Do you feel like a lot of people that are bringing jobs here, are they worried about relocating talent, or are you selling them on the talent that already lives here?
Both. And so, you know, obviously the most beneficial thing that we can do is when a company expands here is that they begin to hire people that live here.
Yeah.
Or people that are graduating from schools here.
Sure.
That's ideal. But they do need to be able to recruit some experienced people that may be living in Chicago. So they might have a marketing executive that they need to recruit.
Yeah.
you can recruit that person to Orlando most times.
Sure.
Not every city can say that for sure, but I think it is an attractive feature that you can recruit. And when you look just at the 500,000 college students I mentioned, there is a growing pipeline here locally of talent. And for instance, UCF's trying to double the number of engineers they have. They've already increased by like 5,000. So they're as many as they can produce will be hired into this market.
All right, so before we go too much farther past Nashville, like what are some other things you took away? I mean, being able to see it from a regional perspective and what they've got going on, what are some things that we can bring back here to Orlando?
I knew I was going to be impressed with Nashville. I had no idea I'd be this impressed with Nashville.
Yeah.
And I think the most salient piece to me, they've certainly done a great job harnessing their brand. We kind of looked into how did they develop this Music City brand? Yeah. When did it come online? It was like over 100 years old. It was the former Queen of England that decided, these people must come from a city of music, and they come on and national TV shows in the 40s. So they have a deep history, and that brand has been sort of organically built over a century plus.
Yep.
So that's interesting because we also have a huge entertainment business here in Central Florida, immersive experiences, obviously. So how do you build on that? And how do you leverage that? I thought was interesting how they've really embraced who they are. Mm-hmm. And then second was the redevelopment that I saw. And so just like Orlando, we have nodes of really cool places.
Sure, downtown.
All over the place.
Yeah.
There's nodes everywhere, but it's connecting those nodes. And it's about redeveloping, a project that is 50 years old that served its purpose.
Yeah.
Now needs to be redeveloped. And I think in a mixed use way. We need a lot more multifamily housing for sure. But when you look at the development of Nashville, the stat that I think is unbelievable is that 68% of their skyline has been built in the last 10 years.
Yeah, the before and after was shocking.
It's incredible.
And think about the forethought. Yeah, but it happened in a decade.
Yeah, so in 2008, they took their long form-based code, gotten complicated over time. It's kind of like a supercar engine. Like it gets all these aftermarket add-ons.
Yeah.
And at some point you got to strip it down and restart with a good engine.
Yeah.
So they did that in 2008, and it really fostered the type of development that they wanted, which in Nashville's case, when you look at this skyline, some of them are hotels, some of them are kind of convention hotels.
Yep.
Some of them are just commercial office buildings, like Amazon putting 5,000 people, Oracle putting 8,000 people. They want that mixed use environment. And then there was certainly multifamily and mixed use. We went to some good restaurants.
Yeah.
But it was all there. I mean, they were really good about sort of diversifying and creating different uses, even new music, live music venues to draw people. So,
yeah, I love the idea. Like they didn't want to go away. Like I think Nashville, growing up as a kid, it was like music, right? That's all they had. But then now it's very diversified. Yet they love on their roots, and I think that's cool because here in Orlando, like we can love on the idea of hospitality and tourism and all that kind of stuff, and that doesn't have to be our only identity. And that's I think they did a really good job in Nashville. So going back to your like the infill is what you're talking about. So for us, we've got Soto, we've got Mills 50, we've got Ivanhoe, we've got Thornton Park, but like in between those, there's some unsavory areas that have old industrial buildings. I think they did a good job kind of like right outside of College Park to kind of get rid of some of those older developments. We could probably do that more, but it's going to take a development, like a pro developer sort of stance. I mean, we do need to take it. I talk to developers on the show all the time of like, make it easy for them to invest in Orlando.
Exactly.
If you don't, then they're going to do it somewhere else.
Right.
So why not here at home?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's kind of creating the rules of the road. Let's be smart about this. Let's do it better than we have done it. Let's continue to improve. Let's not make it all based around the car.
Yeah.
And let's create mixed uses where people can live, work, and play.
Sure.
And the way we describe it is we think the goal should be a region of 15-minute cities.
Yeah, which is a lot of times people crap on that. I don't really know why that would be.
Me neither.
But it is. It's like, oh, it's just another 15-minute city. And you're just like, well, yeah. But I mean, if like they're all interconnected and they're easy to get to, then, and you don't have to leave. Cause one of the things when we came here was like, I hated the idea that when first place we moved here was not super like you had to drive 30 minutes to get everywhere. It was to get to Target or anything like that. But if you can develop all these little pockets up,
right,
and they're interconnected, we crush.
Yeah. I certainly think that's what we have to be thinking about is smart development going forward and laying out the rules of the road, because there's a lot of development that's needed to keep up with the growth.
Yeah.
Like we don't have an option. We're growing. We're going to grow. We've grown for 60 years. We've grown 1,000 people a week for 60 years. So I think we all get it.
I think we're getting it.
Right?
I don't know that's going to slow down. So speaking of the whole vision, like you guys, I know the county's got their own vision. Is it 2040? Are you guys doing 2050?
Yeah, we're trying to look at, so there's so many plans, and there's a lot of foresight, like I mentioned. So local governments, Orange County is one of them, looking out to 2050 on how they develop and how do they protect rural areas, how do they create corridors, urban environments. And so we're trying to pull together sort of, what does their plan look like? What does the airport's plan look like? What does Metro plans? Where's their agreement across the board? Because a lot of this has to happen regionally.
Yeah.
And so that's an important role that we play, is really connecting the dots between what's going on in all the variety of local governments and transportation agencies, and how do we bring people together to think regionally and to think long-term and make sure that we're addressing the long-term needs of the region, so that we don't wake up in 20 years and realize, oh, we were the generation of leaders that blew it.
I don't want that either. That's kind of, that's at my heart. So what would stop the regional leaders from wanting to buy into that? Because it hasn't been done before, and yet there's a reason they're not.
No, I think there's been periods where there's been a lot of regionalism and a lot of regional thinking, and then periods where people kind of put their heads down. And thankfully, I think we've got a group of leaders in Central Florida that are really regionally mindset. I would say that over the last 20 years, Mayor Dyer has really been the grand marshal of that parade, of making sure that there's collaboration across the region. Because it doesn't, what happens at the airport in Orlando impacts those people that live in Seminole County.
Sure.
For instance, even the Semiconductor project, I want people to think about Neo City's 500 acres is where the development has happened so far. We win 2 projects and they're built out. Yeah. So that's going to become a regional cluster. Our cluster that we now have stood up is 23 counties. So it's, how do you start small, start with a nucleus, and expand out? And I think, what are the opportunities? Seminole County has fantastic land at the Sanford Airport with access to rail, obviously the runway. So we're working with them on that really valuable piece of real estate. But when you think about semiconductors, who knows? There could be a connection there that people may not see today. But I think that's a good example of sort of that regional approach to growing the economy.
So they have to see there's a win. Like they want to be, like every politician wants to be the winner, right? And so if they can see a clear path to victory of like, hey, I did this or I helped with this, like that's what we need to, that's what I'm going to focus on. Anyways.
Yeah, basically we want those elected officials to be successful.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to work behind the scenes to help make what they ran on a success.
I love that. What's like one thing, maybe you've brought a business here and they're considering Orlando, that they get to be like what's the biggest wow factor for them? Or like, I didn't realize, because I think telling the story you mentioned earlier is a really important part of all of this. But so what's like one of the things that they come here, or maybe 2 things that they're just like, oh dang, I didn't even know that.
I don't think we have a reputation for higher ed.
Yeah.
Quite like we actually have. And I think that blows people away. Even people like me went to Florida State, Florida. You end up in Orlando a lot of times because of a good job.
Sure.
And so once they realize like that's how things work here, that's how the state works, I think is one surprise is just the talent and the young talent that's here in Central Florida. And then making sort of the connection between tech and tourism. So knowing that at the same time Disney was building their property, the space race was underway. In fact, that's why UCF was founded, Florida Technological University, to supply talent for the space race. So once you realize that those have run on parallel tracks for a long time, and in fact, when you go to the theme parks and you're riding a lot of simulators, there's no reason, there's no wonder what the connection is that, the military has also been using simulators for a long time, and that technology has been built here and translated into entertainment and immersive experiences. So it's helping them see the connection of, most people don't realize it's a 45-minute drive to the Space Coast.
Right. And
they're largely built out. So where's that growth going to come? It's going to come across the 528. It's going to come into Sunbridge, into Orlando. And so there's a real regional economy here.
So cool. All right, last question for you. You look up, and it is 2050. What's something that you would have hoped to accomplish in that time?
I hope we are sort of that great American city that's in Florida. I think Orlando has that opportunity. I think we're well on our way. I think there's been a lot of great things that have happened over time to position us for that success. So sort of that region of 15-minute cities idea, I think, you want to keep the quality of life. The same thing that you moved here, we want the next person to move here and have the same experience. So how do you keep that value proposition? How do you keep it livable, affordable? And then obviously when we're talking about 2050, we had way more investment in transportation.
Yes, please. Jeez. Tim Giuliani, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.